The university library smelled of old paper and possibility. Sarah sat at her usual corner table, surrounded by architectural drawings that represented 3 years of careful planning. Every line was precise, every measurement calculated. She had mapped out not just buildings, but her entire future. Across the reading room, Daniel leaned back in his chair, guitar case propped against the philosophy section. His notebook lay open, filled with half-finished poems and questions that had no answers. He studied philosophy not because it would lead anywhere specific, but because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. Their worlds collided on a Tuesday afternoon when the library's ancient heating system failed. Students clustered together for warmth, and Sarah found herself sharing a table with the boy who always seemed to be staring out windows instead of at books. "You're in my design theory class," she said, more statement than question. Daniel looked up from his notebook. "Am I? I thought that was structural engineering. You've been going to the wrong lectures for 6 weeks," he laughed. And something about that laugh made Sarah's carefully organized world tilt slightly. Explains why nothing made sense. I thought philosophy had gotten really technical. They began talking, and the conversation flowed like water finding its course. Sarah explained her 5-year plan: graduate with honors, join a prestigious firm, make partner by 35. Every step was mapped, every contingency considered. Daniel listened with genuine interest. But what if something unexpected happens? Something wonderful you never planned for? Then it disrupts the plan, Sarah said simply. Maybe that's the point. Over the following weeks, they kept meeting. Not by plan, but by the sort of gravity that pulls certain people together. Daniel would appear at Sarah's table with coffee, and she would find herself closing her textbooks. He showed her how to see the poetry in the building she designed, the stories embedded in steel and stone. She showed him that structure wasn't prison but foundation, that discipline could be freedom. Their friendship confused Sarah's friends. "He doesn't even know what he wants to do after graduation," they said. "He knows exactly what he wants to do," Sarah replied. "He wants to think and write and understand things." That's not nothing. But privately, their differences worried her. How could two people build anything together when they moved through the world so differently? One evening, they climbed to the roof of the architecture building, technically forbidden but unguarded. The city spread below them, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. "I used to come here and see chaos," Sarah said. "Random buildings, no order, no plan. And now? Now I see 1,000 different plans, all existing together. Sometimes conflicting, sometimes supporting each other, somehow making something bigger than any single vision." Daniel pulled out his notebook. "I wrote something today. Can I read it to you?" She nodded, and he read a poem about 2 rivers, one swift and direct, one wandering and curious, eventually flowing together into something neither could have been alone. "That's about us," Sarah said quietly. "Everything I write is about us now." They sat in silence as the city darkened and brightened simultaneously. Sarah felt something inside her relaxing, some grip she'd been maintaining for years finally loosening. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of what?" "That caring about you will derail everything I've worked for. That I'll lose focus, lose direction." Daniel turned to face her fully. "What if you're not losing direction? What if you're just discovering that the destination isn't fixed? That the journey can change you, and that's not failure but growth?" "That's very philosophical. I'm a philosophy major, apparently." She laughed, and then she kissed him, and it felt like the bravest thing she'd ever done, braver than any presentation or exam. Their relationship grew through the remainder of that year. They challenged each other constantly. Daniel pushed Sarah to see beyond her rigid plans, to leave room for serendipity and change. Sarah pushed Daniel to give his dreams structure, to understand that passion without discipline rarely leads anywhere. "You need deadlines," she told him one day, watching him stare at a blank page for an hour. "Deadlines kill creativity. Deadlines create urgency. Creativity without completion is just daydreaming." He grumbled but started setting goals. Finish 1 poem by Friday. Submit to 3 literary journals by month's end. Small structures that didn't confine but channeled his energy. Meanwhile, Sarah began leaving spaces in her calendar marked simply as unplanned. At first, it made her anxious, seeing those blank hours. But gradually she learned to treasure them, to see what emerged when she wasn't controlling every moment. They began collaborating. Sarah would design buildings, and Daniel would write stories about the lives that might unfold within them. His words gave purpose to her structures. Her designs gave homes to his characters. "We're better together," Daniel said one night, both of them exhausted after a joint project. "We're different together," Sarah corrected. "I'm less rigid, you're more focused. We're meeting in the middle. Is the middle where we want to be?" She considered this seriously. "I think the middle is where growth happens. Too much structure and you calcify. Too much freedom and you dissolve. The tension between them creates something new." Graduation approached. Sarah had her job offer from the prestigious firm, starting date already circled on her calendar. Daniel had been accepted to a graduate program in creative writing, though he still wasn't entirely sure that was the right path. "Come with me," Sarah said. "The city where I'm working has amazing writing programs. I already committed to this program." "It's across the country." They stared at each other, the reality of separation settling between them like fog. "Long distance then," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah felt tears threatening. "We can make plans. Visit every 6 weeks. Daily video calls. We can structure it. Can you structure love? I don't know. Can you sustain love without structure?" They were both quiet, both afraid. The night before graduation, they returned to the roof of the architecture building. The city below had become familiar, a place where they'd grown from students into whatever they were becoming next. "I have something for you," Daniel said. He handed her a leather journal, handmade, pages blank. For the thoughts that don't fit in the plan, Sarah pulled out a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a compass, antique brass, beautifully crafted. "For when you're lost. It won't tell you where to go, but it will help you understand where you are." They held their gifts, holding each other. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that we've been asking the wrong question. Not whether we can stay together despite our differences, but whether we can honor our differences while staying true to ourselves and each other. That sounds hard." "Everything worthwhile is hard," Daniel nodded. "So we try. We take our separate paths and see if they can run parallel. Maybe cross sometimes. Maybe eventually converge. No guarantees. No guarantees," Sarah agreed. "But intention, effort, a willingness to adapt." They graduated the next day, threw their caps in the air with everyone else, and then went their separate ways toward different futures. The years that followed were harder than either anticipated. Distance created gaps that video calls couldn't fully bridge. Sarah threw herself into her work, designing buildings that started to win recognition. Daniel struggled in graduate school, questioning everything, nearly quitting twice. They visited when they could, but months would pass between meetings. There were fights. Times when Sarah's need for plans clashed with Daniel's resistance to commitment. Times when Daniel's last-minute changes ruined Sarah's carefully arranged visits. They broke up twice, got back together twice, each reunion more tentative than the last. But something kept pulling them back. Not just love, though that was there. Something deeper. A recognition that they made each other more whole. That Sarah's structures gave Daniel's dreams grounding. That Daniel's openness kept Sarah's plans from becoming prisons. 3 years after graduation, Daniel finished his degree and Sarah made senior designer. They both ended up in the same city, not through planning, but through a series of small decisions that gradually aligned their paths. Their reunion wasn't dramatic. Just dinner at a quiet restaurant, conversation that picked up as if they'd never been apart. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, "about what you said on that roof. About parallel paths. I remember. I think we were wrong. Not wrong to try, but wrong about what we were trying. We were trying to keep our paths separate, but close. What if instead we tried to build one path together? Not me following yours or you following mine, but something we designed together?" Sarah reached across the table, took his hand. "That would require compromise. Real compromise. Not just accommodation." I know. It would mean you'd have to accept more structure. Commit to plans. I know. And I'd have to accept more uncertainty. Let go of control sometimes. Would that be so terrible? She smiled. 2 years ago, I would have said yes. Now I think it might be exactly what I need. They moved in together 6 months later. Not into one of their apartments, but into a new space they chose together. Sarah picked the neighborhood for its access to her firm. Daniel picked the apartment for its light, and the park nearby where he could write. They decorated together, her clean lines mixing with his collected treasures, creating something that was neither his style nor hers, but theirs. They learned to negotiate. When to plan and when to improvise. When to stick to the structure and when to abandon it for spontaneity. It wasn't always smooth. Old patterns resurfaced. Sarah would try to control too much. Daniel would resist commitment. But they learned to recognize these moments, to call them out gently, to pull each other back toward the middle ground they'd claimed. Daniel got a job teaching creative writing at a community college. Not the professorship at a prestigious university that graduate school had supposedly prepared him for, but work that fulfilled him, that left time for his own writing. Sarah turned down a promotion that would have required 60-hour weeks, choosing instead a position that challenged her creatively but left time for life outside work. We're both compromising, Daniel observed one evening. Are we? Sarah asked. Or are we just choosing differently than we would have alone? Is there a difference? I think so. Compromise suggests loss. This feels more like ... expansion. I'm not smaller for having you in my life. I'm bigger. I contain more possibilities. Daniel pulled her close. That's very philosophical. I'm dating a philosophy teacher. Apparently it's contagious. Years continued. They collaborated on a book together. Sarah's architectural drawings paired with Daniel's prose poems about the lives within buildings. It was published by a small press, didn't sell many copies, but meant everything to them. Proof that their different approaches could create something neither could have made alone. They got married on a random Tuesday, small ceremony at City Hall, then dinner with close friends. No elaborate planning, no rigid schedule, but also not completely spontaneous. A middle ground. Intentional, but flexible. Did you ever imagine this? Daniel asked on their wedding night, both of them on their apartment roof, the city below them so different from the one where they'd met. No, Sarah admitted. It doesn't look like anything I planned. Regrets? She turned to him, seeing the boy from the library, and the man he'd become, seeing her own reflection in his eyes, someone she wouldn't have recognized years ago. Less rigid but not formless. Still structured but with spaces for surprise. None, she said. Every detour led here. Every unexpected turn. My life isn't what I mapped out, but it's more than I mapped out. Bigger, fuller, better. That's what love does, Daniel said. It adds dimensions you didn't know existed. They stood together watching the city too. Different people who'd learned to move as one without losing themselves, who discovered that the deepest connections aren't about similarity, but about complementarity, about how different strengths can build something stronger than either alone. Below them, lights flickered in windows. Other lives, other stories, other people finding their own ways through the beautiful complexity of being human, of connecting, of building lives that honor both who we are and who we become together. The compass and the map, Sarah thought, both necessary. The compass for direction when you're lost, the map for structure when you need guidance. But neither sufficient alone. Together, though, together they could chart any territory, navigate any challenge, find any destination worth reaching. And the most important destination, they'd learned, wasn't a place but a way of being. Together. Different but united. Structured but free. Planned but open to surprise. Not perfect but real. Not easy but worth it. Not what either had imagined, but better than either had dreamed. The end and the beginning all at once.